Hey everybody, this is Pierre Quinn and you're listening to the Leading While Green podcast, where my mission is to help you live, learn, and lead with confidence. On today's episode number 12, we'll be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers and unrealistic expectations, give you some highlights from my talk for the Future Business Leaders of America, and I'll spend the bulk of the time giving you a recap of the revision conference with a reminder on why you need a great team. So, listen up. Is it me, or does it just seem like time flies? I mean, I'm sitting down to record this podcast on a Thursday, and to me, it feels like it was just Sunday. I was just at the revision conference, which I've been plugging just all the time on this podcast. But now the revision conference, it's over. It's Thursday, and I'm reflecting back on that experience. And I'm telling you, if you missed it, if you are in the if you're in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area and you missed it, I'm telling you, you missed it. So be on the lookout when the next revision conference comes around. But I'll get to that later in the podcast. What I want to talk to you about now is, well, first is this idea of setting realistic expectations. So I'm a basketball fan. I'm a sports guy. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a super avid fan or sports junkie, but I like to keep up, for the most part, what happens in sports and basketball most of all. I've been paying attention to the headlines surrounding the basketball season. A lot of injuries starting this season, which has really caused teams to reshape how they're going to do the season with several key players being out for long periods of time. But one of the main areas of focus, or main teams of focus, is the Cleveland Cavaliers. There's a lot of hype surrounding Cleveland. This back and forth with Golden State over the past couple of years for the championship, and questions about if their star player, LeBron James, is going to stick with the team over the long haul. Is he going to go to LA? You know, sports has a way of creating its own drama. And that's really what fuels it. You have commentators and people with opinions and people with blogs and people like me that kind of throw stuff out there, kind of fueling this machine, this monster of sports reporting. But the big thing as it relates to Cleveland now is their record. Right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers are 3-5. They have 3 wins and 5 losses. And it's been a media firestorm related to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Everybody's figuring out what's wrong. Why aren't they winning? They made all these moves in the offseason. What's taking them so long to gel? And we forget that it's only been 8 games. Now, you say they're professional basketball players. They do this for a living. Why can't they just automatically click with each other and get it going? I haven't played on the professional level. The most I've played, the highest I've played was college intramurals. And you play these pickup games in college and you pick your team. And there are sometimes when you pick your team, you're picking mostly good players, or in my case, I was consistently picking players who were better than I was. You pick good players and you think, man, this is going to be great. We're going to work so well together. Everybody can play. It's going to be fun. But for some reason, you just don't gel and you get beat. You can't figure out how to play together. You can't figure out who's going to be in what place and what spot, who's going to do what. And that can really mess with a team. Now, I've been on teams, on intramural teams, where you pick your team and you play and you think you're going to win because you think you have a pretty decent team, and you lose. And then you sign up to get back into it again. And that second time around, you've been watching the games, you've been studying the other players, you've had conversations with your teammates. And the second time around, you fare much better because now the roles are a bit more clearly defined. I know this is in no way compared to the level of intensity at an NBA game, but the premise still applies that sometimes we need to set more realistic expectations for our team. So people are thinking they have LeBron, they have Dwayne Wade, even though he's a bit older. They have Dwayne Wade on the team. They have Kevin Love. They have Derrick Rose, who was an all-star, and he's battled some injuries over the year, but he's come back. And even though they've lost Kyrie Irving, which is a budding NBA star, on the edge really of superstar, people were saying the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be super solid because they have the best player on the planet. That's what many people say. LeBron is the best player on the planet, and it'll be easy, super easy for him to bring the team together. And we think like that sometimes. We think on our teams, we think in our organizations, we think, and we've made a great hire. We've added some people to the team, 2 or 3 people to the team. And in 6 months and 9 months, everything is going to be great. Everything is going to gel, and we're going to be running at optimal level. And then sometimes there's a letdown when you're not working at that level and people are trying to figure out what's going on. And what's really going on is that you're establishing a new culture. Every time you add a new person to the team, every time you create a new initiative, all of those things are impacting the culture. And sometimes those new hires and new moves totally change the culture altogether. So I pastor a church near Washington, D.C., and I started at this church that has about 600 plus members on paper. On the weekend, our weekend services, anywhere it can really, the pendulum could swing. We could have anywhere between 300 and 400 worshiping at our weekend services. Now, I come into this church July of 2016, and it's an election year for the church. This particular church, they do church officer elections every 2 years. So I come in on an election year, which means as I'm trying to get acclimated to the church, I'm working to guide the church through the selection of their new officers. So the people that I've worked with, I've only worked with a group of people for 6 months. And some of them, sad to say, when they realized or understood that it was an election year and maybe even a possibility of them not being reelected, they just checked out. Honestly, they just checked out, which seems to be commonplace in a lot of areas. When you're shifting job, leaving a job, some people check out, and which is really unfortunate. So after 6 months of working with a group of people, I now am working with a totally different team of individuals, and we've been working together as ministry leaders in the church since January. It's November now. It's 11 months in. And people are asking, why aren't things moving fast? What's going on? Things are all over the place. How come we can't bring it all together? And the reality is when you make a major shift in your personnel, major shift in your ministry leaders, you're creating a totally different culture, and you're battling the culture that was already established. And it takes some time to gel. It takes some time to bring the pieces together. It takes some time to reevaluate the standards and reaffirm the mission and put the organization in the direction that it needs to go. So we need to begin setting realistic expectations for our teams, for our groups. I know Thom is I believe he's the president of Lifeway. I'll put it in the show notes. Thom in his books, and he has incredible insights and research on pastoral ministry and leadership, suggests that it takes about 3.5 years, 4 years for a church to embrace the pastor. It takes 3.5 to 4 years for the church to embrace the spiritual leader of the church. And that's really rough sometimes for the person. And I know what it's like to sit in that seat. You want things to move fast, but you can only move as fast as the speed of trust. As the speed of trust. I believe Stephen Covey's son wrote that book, maybe Speed of Trust. I'll check it. And if it's right, I'll put it in the show notes. If not, I won't mention it again. But you can only move your organization as fast as the speed of trust. So for the Cleveland Cavaliers, as they trust each other more, I know many of the players have been friends for a long time, but as they get used to each other's playing style and trust each other more, I'm sure that team will be fine. And the same with our organizations. As we build up that trust, as we build up that competency, as we set realistic expectations, we'll begin to see our teams turn around. But in many cases, it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in 6 to 9 months. It takes a bit longer than that. So I had the privilege this week yesterday presenting for the Maryland Future Business Leaders of America Leadership Conference. Future Business Leaders of America. There's this organization in every state and works primarily with high school and college students to prepare them for life and success beyond high school. High school and middle school students, preparing them for success beyond that. And I gave a presentation in reference to movie secrets for great life and great leadership. And I broke down one of my favorite movies and how the elements of good movies, we can find some practical application for good leadership from the elements of good movies. And I was sitting there with these high school students and some middle school students and just realizing, man, teachers have probably one of the most difficult jobs on the planet. Shouts out to everybody out there who's a teacher. My wife has a degree in elementary education. I taught college courses for nearly a decade, but there's something really unique about teaching high school classes. So shout out to all of my high school classes, all of my high school teachers out there, all of my high school students who listen to this. High school teachers have a difficult job as high school students in those teenage years are wrestling with this transition to adulthood and hormones and responsibilities and self-discovery and self-awareness and trying to make that transition and learn at the same time. So shout out to my high school teachers, to my middle school teachers. We really should pay you more. You often have a thankless job and you really help young people set the standard for the rest of their lives. But it reminded me as I was talking to the students of my responsibility as a leader, my responsibility as a person who has been given privileges and advantages. And believe me, I've had my fair share of hardships, and I've revealed part of my story on this podcast. But it reminded me of the necessity of reaching back, of giving something to the generation that comes after me. These high school students in 20 years, in 10 years, many of them will be innovators. They'll be entrepreneurs. They'll sit in major seats of power and influence. And it's my responsibility to live my life, not just for me and selfish wants and desires, but really to live my life realizing that there's somebody coming. There are people coming after me. And how can I pour into that next generation of leaders? So I consider it a joy to go and speak to high school students. And let me tell you, high school students are a tough crowd. High school students are a tough crowd. They're not like us as adults. As adults, if your presentation is not that great, we'll bear with it. For the most part, we'll be courteous. We'll smile. We'll try or pretend to pay attention. Not high school students. They can check out really quickly. So it's really important if you're talking to a high school audience to engage them quickly. One of the things that I do when I speak to high school groups, I get them talking to each other early and I get them moving early. I get the energy level up in the room as far as possible, depending on the size of the group and the venue. But I get them moving and engaged. And once I get them moving and engaged, it's easier to connect with them. So as much as possible, if you speak to high school kids, if you teach high school kids, take some time to really evaluate how you can use the power of an engagement. Our learning styles differ, and I know there's some talk about our learning styles really a thing, but the boys and girls, men and women, males and females are really wired differently for the most part as it comes to learning. And we need to pay attention to that and not just teach one style, not just this lecture style of teaching. How can we teach with tactile learning, with experiential stuff? How can we help students teach each other and really help them to draw out the concepts and wrestle with the concepts for themselves? So that was Future Business Leaders of America. And if you work at a high school, if you're a high school principal or teacher, college professor, college administrator, and you're looking for someone to come in and talk to your young people about leadership, about life balance, about personal development, about growth and self-discovery and success, hit me up on my website, pierrequinn.com. There's a tab there for education, and I would love to talk to you about connecting with your group. Speaking of connecting with groups, the Revision Conference was a fantastic experience. We had the last revision conference, October 29th at the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus. And I know I've been talking about it over and 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 over again on this podcast because I really wanted you to be there, especially if you were in the DMV area. But check this out. Check this out. There was a group, and I remember on Facebook Live, I've talked about the power of booking yourself and hiring yourself if you're waiting for someone to hire you. And really the revision conference is part of my mission to book myself as and not just waiting around for schools, for nonprofits, for faith-based institutions, for corporations to hire me as a speaker. The revision conference is part of my journey to book myself. And we had a group of student leaders from the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, the University of St. Thomas, their executive board for their leadership club. They flew in. Listen, y'all. They flew in all the way from Minnesota. All the way from Minnesota. They found the conference on Eventbrite. They were looking for a leadership event. And they found it on Eventbrite. They booked plane tickets. They booked hotel rooms. And they flew in from Minnesota. If you look on my Instagram at Pierre Quinn, you can see some pictures from a picture of a picture of that student group from the University of St. Thomas. And man, we tried to pour into that group as much as we possibly could. We were overwhelmed, really, that they would come from so far just to be at our event, because we were primarily looking at people in the DMV area. But let me tell you, you never know who's watching. You never know who's looking. You never know who's paying attention. And that's why you always got to put your best foot forward. We didn't up our game or up our ante because on the day of the conference, we found out we had guests all the way from Minnesota. No, the level of intensity and intentionality was the same. And it would have been the same regardless of who we had in attendance. So it was a fantastic event. We really poured into those young people and to our entire group, all the attendees. And if you're an attendee and listening to this, shout out to you for coming through. We really appreciate you for spending time, taking half of your Sunday. And I know we fed you a little bit, but you took half of your Sunday so our group could pour into you. And let me tell you, when you want to make something happen on a large scale, you have to have a fantastic team. You got to have a fantastic team. This revision idea, this conference idea started with a brainstorm that I was having related to some church ministry teaching, but it really blossomed into so much more. And I remember sharing the idea with a couple of my friends, and they said, let's put a plan together. Let's put a team together and let's do this thing. Shouts out to my good friend, Matthew Matovu, who was in charge of logistics for the conference, pulling together the details and the behind the scenes stuff. Matthew he's a physical therapist, but man, he's got a knack for details and logistics and pulling people together and pulling events together. So shouts out to Matthew. And my team of speakers was fantastic. Chip Dizard, check him out, chipdizard.com, ChipDizard.com. Chip right now, his passion right now is wedding photography, and he's an international wedding photographer. His videos, wedding reception videos, have gone viral several times. He's been published in major media outlets, and Chip spoke about the concept of what it means to win. And what do you have to do to win in life as a leader? Elroy Byam, and you can check him out at Elroy Byam. Just Google Elroy Byam photography or elroybyam.com, and I'll put it in the show notes. Elroy is a lifestyle photographer, and he's a media producer that works for an international faith-based media production company. And Elroy was our host for the day, host for the entire conference, really challenging the attendees to ask themselves why they were here and challenging them with the changes that they're called to make in life. Dr. David Defoe, good friend of mine. We go back 20 years. AmaraCounseling.com, IMARA counseling.com. And Dr. Defoe talked about how we wrestle with our fears and how all of us have fears. And most of the time our fears are irrational. And this idea, if we're going to do something that scares us, we need to do it afraid anyway. Our coach for the day was Dalton Beckles, good friend of mine, New Hope Clinical Services.com, newhopeclinical.com. I'll put it in the show notes. And so you can see, Dalton is a certified life coach. He is a counselor. He's a therapist, and he really just challenged us to dig deep after every presenter to apply right there, to create a strategy right there, to create a process right there, and to have some accountability. One of the unique things about the revision conference, and one of the students from the University of St. Thomas said this to us, that the way that we provided a space for them to work through the concepts as soon as they were given was really, really unique. My boy, Chris Bartley, bartley.group, my boy, Chris Bartley, just totally smashed it the same way that he did at the first revision conference. And man, just talked about how to design your life. Right now, his focus is UX and UI design and also business strategy. And he just talked about the steps that we go through to redesign our life. And he talked about his book project, The Anti-Hero, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. We missed one of our speakers who was there at the last revision conference, Robert Kennedy, RK3, just a fantastic speaker. He wasn't at this one, but he was at our first revision conference and did an amazing job. And I'll put his contact information in the show notes as well if you're looking for someone to help you become a better speaker and better communicator. But the revision conference worked so well, and we're looking at other cities. So if you got suggestions for cities, let me know, hit me up. It worked so well because of the team that we had together, how our team worked together, how everybody stayed in their lane, how everybody spoke to their strengths, and how we supported each other. At the end of all the main sessions, we had a Q&A, and someone asked me the question, how did you pick your team for the revision conference? Well, a big part of it is that Elroy, Chris, David, Defoe, Dalton, and myself, we all went to college together. We've all worked on projects together. So this was nothing new, really. We've been working on productions and we've done ministry stuff together. And Dalton and I actually had a seminar back in college called Mind, Body, and Soul. And we were talking about mental health, personal development, and relationships and spiritual development. So we've been doing conferences and events really before we knew what we were doing. So my relationship that I had with those individuals put me in a place where I was willing to ask them, and they know just about everything about my life. And sometimes we try to look far for people that we can collaborate with, but sometimes the people that we really need to collaborate with are close to us. Now, I met Chip about 7 or 8 years ago when I was looking to work on a media project, and somebody shared with me that I needed to call Chip because he has great advice about technology and ministry, and that's what his focus was at the time. And when I talked to Chip on the phone, he talked to me like he was my big brother, like we knew each other for a long time. And we just developed a friendship that has lasted all of these years. And we're always interested in what each other is doing and pushing each other. So shouts out to you, to you, Chip. And this is how the team came together. And we set some realistic expectations. Going back to my first point in the podcast, we set realistic expectations starting off on how many people we thought would come to the conference, how it should roll, and we're progressing. And now after the second one, we're kind of getting close to an inflection point and realizing, man, we have an impact with this thing. We have an impact with this team to make a real difference in people's lives, but it doesn't happen overnight. And I remember one of the attendees at the conference saying that people are looking at you and they're looking at this idea and they're trying to see if you're serious about it. You can pull it off one time and that's cute. You can pull it off 2 times and that's cute. And we applaud you for the second conference, but we want to see if you're in it for the long haul. And as you're in it for the long haul, people will actually catch on and buy into what you're doing. That was one of the things that I shared with the high school students at the Future Business Leaders of America leadership conference, this opportunity to be consistent and even what seems like the mundane things of life, being consistent in those areas will allow you to develop some consistency over time. And become known for that. And once you build up that consistency and that intentionality, then you'll get the support and people will buy in to the great cause that you're looking to serve. Now, let me just go back to my presentation to the future business leaders of America. I talked about movie secrets for a great life, and I was pulling out principles of leadership from how great movies are made. And I was talking about The Lion King. That's the movie I was using. And I was talking about how James Earl Jones has this culture around him. He is known for excellence in acting. In television, in film, and stage plays, he's known. James Earl Jones is the voice was the voice of Darth Vader. I think he's the voice on CNN, that voice that says, "This is CNN." It sounds like him, but if it's not him, somebody let me know if it's him or not. But I was just talking about just how when movie makers write, when they script roles for certain people, they're not looking for a type of actor. We want someone tall, or we want someone strong, or we want someone brave. No, after a while, because of your reputation, they start to call you by name. I'm writing this role for this person. I'm writing this role for that person. And James Earl Jones has developed a culture of consistency and intentionality around him that makes him a sought after actor. And I see that they're coming out with a live action version of The Lion King. In The Lion King, James Earl Jones played the voice of Mufasa, the lead character, Simba's father. And if you haven't seen it, I won't do too many spoilers. But it was interesting to note that for the live action version of The Lion King, who's playing Mufasa again in the live action version? None other than James Earl Jones. Because really nobody can take that spot from him. His voice really shaped that role in the first movie, and is going to shape the role in the live action. And if I remember, I saw the poster on social media. I think James Earl Jones is the only voice actor from the first animated Lion King that is here years later for the live action version. And that just tells you the level of respect the level of respect for James Earl Jones and his craft, and the amount of regard people have for him, and the way that he's carried himself and been consistent over his lifetime and really shaped roles. He's really shaped and formed roles, and now people are asking for him by name. And we need to get to the point as leaders that because of our intentionality, because of our character, because of our consistency, that when opportunities come up, when things are being constructed, when programs are being put together, people look at us and say, man, yep, that's a role specifically for them. And part of being a good leader demands that you be consistent. And if we can be as consistent in our life and leadership as James Earl Jones has been with his acting career, man, we can do some amazing things in this world. Hey, that's all I got for this episode of Leading While Green. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And if you really want to show that you've enjoyed it, head over to iTunes. Shout out to everybody who's given me a great review on iTunes. I really, really, really appreciate it. Your review on iTunes really helps me share this message with the world. The more ratings, just like Yelp or just like anything else, the more ratings you get, then the more people pay attention to what you're doing. So head over to iTunes and leave me a rating. Check out my blog, pierrequinn.com, where I'll post the audio from this podcast as well. And I'll answer your questions about life or leadership. And I might be coming to a city near you to talk about living and learning and leading with confidence. So be on the lookout for that. But until next time, take care and God bless.